forward to this, because I feel like
Yeah.
this is something that we all definitely need. If not us, then there's definitely some folks that could benefit from our guests today.
Absolutely. And no one is immune from grief. No one is right. No one is exempt from grief. We all grieve. And this is a very trying times right now. So our special guest, we have Reverend Shannon Farron Bernardin. She's a chaplain and grief counselor. That's Shannon. And we have Mercedes White, which anyone who watches every week, you see Mercedes. She's like our biggest supporter. She's the founder of the NYC Stop the Bullying program. And she is the daughter of the legendary Sandman Sims from the Apollo. And she's one of my best friends. And then here we have Charlie Jaffe. I don't know if I pronounced it right, Charlie. So
you got it right.
I did. All right. And Charlie is a crisis counselor and suicide prevention counselor for the LGBTQ youth community. So welcome, ladies, to Lunchtime Lift. Welcome. So Mike, yeah, there we go. So I want to first start off, if we can, let's talk to Shannon. Shannon, I would like to know, tell us a little bit about what it is that you do. I know that you're reverend, but the churches, I'm assuming your church is probably not open like many of the churches. I know mine is not. So tell us what it is that you do.
Sure. So I am an ordained minister, but right now I'm working primarily as a chaplain out in the community. And my work really involves supporting people through experiences of grief, experiences of loss, mental illness. And you know, there is so much loss right now. Holidays are just a difficult time of year for a lot of people. But then when you add on the experiences of all the stress, coping with a pandemic, and people are experiencing really different kinds of losses this year. There are times with family and traditions that normally people would be doing this time of year, and they can't be together with those people. And a lot of people have experienced losses of people they love from COVID. So this is a challenging time, and people's needs are really magnified this year in new ways.
Yeah. You know what too, Shannon, is that a lot of time people equate loss with just loss of loved ones, right? Or friends,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it can be loss of employment, because
Yes.
that's a loss of a relationship. There's so many other losses that we really don't think about. And so I'm going to share that one of the things is that I saw the COVID Grief Network. And before I bring anything to our viewers, what I like to do is kind of find out about it first, right? Because I don't want there to be a hidden cost and I tell you it's free. So let me find out exactly what it is. So I connected with the COVID Grief Network, which connected me to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I got to know you. And we spent an hour a week for maybe 10 weeks. And I didn't even realize all of the stress from the people dying around me, the people in the church, that how it was making me feel. And so sometimes, you know, I equate it to, you look at a house and the house is newly painted, the house looks great on the outside, but when you get inside the door, you find out that the towels are missing in the kitchen, you know, maybe there's some towels in the bathroom that's missing. You don't realize that because you're going through your day-to-day operations. And yet, those resources are available to you. And once you tap into them, you'll find some things that you're feeling that you don't even know you were feeling. So I thank you for that, Shannon. Yeah. So you've done a great, how long have you been working in grief counseling altogether? How long have you been doing that?
Grief is something that I kind of stumbled into by accident. I used to be a college chaplain in Minnesota, and there was an opportunity to start a grief group on campus. And so that's something that I started to do. And then I ended up teaching a course on death and dying. And it's just something that is hard for us to talk about in our society. And so I think that we stay away from talking about it. And so then when we experience a loss, and like you're saying, there's so many different kinds of losses, we often find ourselves so unprepared. We don't know what's normal, what's not. Most people think there's really specific ways to experience grief, and there's a small list of those ways. And so they can be having a totally normal experience and think that something's wrong with them.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so excited that you're talking about this, because both in the case of grief, mental illness, suicide. If we can talk about these things, if we can put them out there, we really decrease the stigma, and then people don't have to feel so alone, and they don't have to be so hopeless, because they can understand that they're going through something that's human. It's really normal. And
Yeah.
the best part about it is there are resources. There are ways to get connected. You know, there's things that really work to support people. So there's always hope.
Yeah, yeah, and great. It's so great because you bring a lot of resources to the table and a lot of way of just thinking things. And there are little techniques that can open you up to accepting the grief, accepting what it is that you're feeling, and identifying it. You know, so I mean, maybe we can get a chance to talk about a couple of those things that you do. So we'll bring that back. Charlie, I'd like to talk to you, if I may, if you could tell us what it is that you do. And I know that you are very big on suicide prevention in our LGBTQ community. So can you talk about that a little bit for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say I have my hands in sort of a number of different projects. So one thing that I do that's I really think of as sacred work of mine is crisis counseling. So talking to young folks in crisis who, whether it's around their identity or coming out, or oftentimes, unfortunately, getting kicked out of the house and experiencing harassment, to folks who call and say, hey, I want to die, and how we show up for each other there. But it's also very important to me to reach the people who aren't calling, because well over 15 years ago, I was a suicidal teen myself, and I know that I didn't reach out for help. And so I had that question, how can I know that I wasn't the only one, how can I reach more of those people? And that's when I started exploring the power of storytelling, to be able to say, how can we reach those messages and to the right people at the right time? And research actually shows that while stories of completed suicides can lead to an increase in rates, stories of survival, stories of being in that place and getting help and getting support can actually be something that, for those of us who are in that place that's quite sort of high risk and dangerous, that can push us in the direction of getting help. So I work on media and suicide prevention as well, and then I'm a part of the COVID Grief Network as well, which is just such a joy to get to be a part of, and just feels, again, very sacred and important to me. I used to run a yoga school, and it's amazing how I never imagined that I would take something so different, but find it absolutely, just as sacred and important of work to do.
Yeah, Charlie, I think you're in San Diego now, right? Did you say San Diego?
I am.
Okay.
I was.
You were in Brooklyn.
Yes, I was in Brooklyn. I miss it. I miss it very, very much.
Yeah. How did you get to this space, though? Like, so as a teen with suicidal thoughts, how did you get to this space, to where you are right now?
Yeah, it was a long road. So I didn't come out publicly about deciding to kill myself until probably 14 years later. So there was a long time in between. Wow. And I was very good, I guess you could say, at avoiding, but that doesn't last forever, right? We think we can just bury things and push things away. And we don't realize that what we're actually doing is planting toxic seeds. And it might be a couple years later, it might be 5 years later, 10 years later, but those seeds eventually bloom. And it did really come back to hit me in my 20s, and both physically and mentally. And so for me, it was a kind of long and winding journey. And I had been in my 20s near death ill with complications that are actually what kills COVID patients. Oh, wow. And so it's interesting, because so often we think if someone gets out of the hospital doors, my doctors had said, like, congratulations, you survived, like, you'll be fine. And I saw over 24, medical professionals. I'd been in the ICU, had very traumatic experiences, not being able to breathe. And not a single point in my recovery, in the months of learning how to walk again, because I'd been in an accident, did anyone say, hey, you survived something pretty hard. And it's normal to have complicated feelings about that. It's normal to need to talk about it. It's normal for things to come up. No one ever really gave me that permission. So I assumed if no one brought it up, then I should be fine. And I didn't know that PTSD can show up months after. So I thought, like, I went back into my life. I was all busy. I was living in a 4-story walk-up in New York, had a dream internship, like thought I was fine. And then everything came crashing down.
Yeah.
So it was really through my own experiences that eventually pushed me to say, like, I want to understand the human mind more, because I don't get it. And I'm a very curious person. And so eventually a long winding road took me to grad school out at Columbia, up in Harlem, and focusing on psychology. And it was actually my own experience of feeling really isolated and struggling with depression myself that pushed me into crisis counseling, being like, hey, I know showing up for other people actually benefits myself and makes me feel better. And I want to find meaning. So that's the sort of like a short version of the winding road that got me into that I'm doing today.
And what an amazing road. What an amazing road. And what an amazing woman you are. What an amazing road. So thank you for sharing that. And you know what, you see, you lend to my home concept, but sometimes see the house is painted. Everything looks so good on the outside, and then you go inside and you see the missing floor tiles. And you know what, if you walked across the floor all along, you think that, hey, it's not that big a deal, right? That the floor tiles are missing, because that's just the way it is, and it's okay. Until later on, you start to feel like that, well, maybe it's not okay. Maybe there's something else to this that I should look into. And I don't think that anyone can come out of this whole pandemic without some form of PTSD. I mean, something. We've been watching numbers of people dying every day, people getting sick every day, some people close to us passing away. I don't know how many people in my church, maybe 30 of the seniors in our church pass away. So how does that not affect someone? You know, so I want to bring Mercedes into the conversation, because Mercedes had a lot of traumatic experiences in her life. So I'm going to see if we were having some problems with her audio, but I'm hoping that it's fine now. So Mercedes, tell us a little bit about how are you?
Good, guys.
Okay. So what led you to starting the Stop the Bullying program?
My son was murdered 30 years ago, and no one went to jail for murdering my son. It was 7 bullies. The one that pulled the trigger, actually, I'm around sometimes. I go back to the neighborhood to do certain things, and I'm standing right in front of the person that actually pulled the trigger. He hasn't gone to jail. No one went to jail for it. So I thought, in order to get some peace and with no one else can have to go through what I went through, I thought of doing this program, Stop the Bully program. Beginning right now, because this right here, we're discussing today, I'm actually wrapped up in all of it, because right now I'm manic. So I can discuss that as well. But, and his murders what caused me to have a bipolar. And right now I'm manic. I'm actually going through the manic part of it for a couple of weeks now. But I thought that would give a little bit of closure, and the program would stop people from, help with people not having to go through what I go through every day. So I did the program. I did it in the with my son and my dad. My dad was into dancing. And music and dance and arts and stuff also help with manic depression. It helps with people that want to be bullies. You can use that tool to get to them. So I incorporated that into the Stop the Bully program. But back to your question, I started the Stop the Bully program because of my son David White that was murdered he was murdered August 14, 1990. No one ever went to jail. And I was also a product of being bullied when I was younger. So I thought if I put the program together and bring in some in-house services and give everyone something to do, the people that's being bullied, the people that are bullying people, the families, everybody will have something to do. So that's what started me with good about the program. I don't want no mother, no father, no sisters, no brothers to go through what I go through every day. So that's why I did the program.
Yeah. You know, see, is this when you see people in pain, I mean, we've been friends for a very long time, and we've had a lot of in-depth conversations. And you know, you live with this pain every day. Shannon, like, what do we say? Like, when, I mean, as Mercedes' friend and somebody who loves her dearly, I try and I struggle with the right, if I could use that word, the right words to say. I don't always know the right words to say, just to be supportive. What do we say? What do you know? What I mean, she told it. I don't know if everyone could hear that she said that she's manic, and she said that she's bipolar. So I know the audio is not that great, so I wanted to repeat it. Shannon, what would you say?
So I think that this the sense of not knowing what to say or what to do is so common that it stops people from doing anything. And I think that the answer is that there is no one thing you're supposed to do or say besides accompanying somebody and not leaving somebody alone. I mean, these experiences, you know, I think about these things theologically from a religious perspective. And so I think about these things as wilderness experiences, right? These are the times when people are in a wilderness, and we don't want people to walk alone. So it doesn't matter if we're talking about suicide prevention or crisis or long-term challenges, we need to accompany people. And we need to help set up a scaffolding in a system so that we aren't the only people doing that. So sometimes it can be really, really helpful to build a team. So to ask a person, who are 4 or 5 people in your life who can be trusted individuals, so that they have crisis phone numbers on their body for when you call them, so that they know a few things that cheer you up, so that they know how to stop by your house and bring you your favorite foods. I mean, just to walk beside somebody like that, that's a game changer.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah. And one of the other reasons why I wanted Mercedes to share, and you were so willing to do that, and I love you for that, is because her dad is a legendary icon, you know? And so sometimes people think that trauma and things like that, they don't happen to the celebrity folks. They don't happen to them, right? This happens to just, you know, the everyday people, but that's not true. It's like we're all in this together, regardless of rather, you know, who her parents are, who I am, how, you know, my children. It really doesn't matter. We're really all in this together. So I know that sometimes people think that that's not the case, right? And that, you know, it's just the everyday people that some of this stuff happens to, and that's not true.
I feel like I'm by myself there because I thank God they don't have to go through what I'm going through right now. So.
Yeah. Well, you're not by yourself, because I love you and I'm right there with you, and I know that and you see Michael. You know Michael loves you. And so you're not by yourself, and there are resources, and that's one of the reasons why I want to continue to do webinars such as this, because when people think that they're by themselves and there's no hope, we have to be able to show people that there's hope and that there's something, another light at the end of this tunnel. We have to. This can't be all there is. I know that there's better, right? So I know I want to connect you to Shannon, and connect you to Charlie, because these are some great resources, and they'll let you know, right, Charlie, that she's not alone. So let's talk a little bit about, Charlie, when you do the crisis counseling, what are some of the things that you come across?
I mean, just about everything you can think of in terms of like trauma and challenging life experiences. But I really appreciate, Shannon, what you were talking about in terms of the wilderness. I think that and accompanying, and I think that resonates so much. And I think, you know, oftentimes when we have a friend who's facing a big problem, our instinct can be like, okay, well, I can help you fix it. And that's skipping a step, because that person doesn't necessarily need you to help them fix it. They need, they're in the wilderness. You can't find the destination for them. And so being able to say that I'm here with you, to sit with you in this pain, to listen, as Fadra had just said there, like to be able to just be present with it and have permission for things to not be okay is such a powerful first step. And you know, when we look at crisis counseling, that's a very, I train a lot of our counselors, and we're very specific about that, of like, you do not get into any solution planning until there's been space for the respect of that. You know, someone had once said, grief is love with nowhere else to go.
Wow.
When I was in a grief group, and that really resonated, and it gave a new meaning to grief for me, of, you know, the depths that we grieve really oftentimes can reflect the depth to which we love, and being able to have someone sit in that and say, okay, grief deserves a seat at the table. It's not something we need to bury or hide, which is so often how we operate. So a big piece is giving permission for that space, and also asking the direct questions. One thing that counseling has totally changed my life in is my comfort level and how I approach friends and people in my own life. I have, outside that work, I have, you know, a short handful of people who are very close to me where they do experience crisis on a not infrequent basis. And so we've done a lot of these steps that Shannon had mentioned around, like, okay, what are these things that we know will help, but also put not like almost like rules in place of, okay, if it's someone who doesn't usually experience suicidal thoughts and those thoughts come up, we have an agreement, hey, you'll reach out to me and let me know. Or if they experience those thoughts a lot and that's their baseline, then our bar may be different, and maybe, hey, if you start to get a plan in your head, you call me. And having those expectations set up ahead of time, because when we're in crisis, making decisions is so hard. Our brain is operating differently. Things are firing differently. So if we can have a set plan of, if I feel this, then I do that, that's so helpful, because so many completed suicides, the space between, you know, that impulse coming up and a completed suicide can be fairly short. And so if we can survive that crisis moment, then it gives us the space to do greater work. But it's about oftentimes having things set up so that in that really imminent crisis moment, we have those systems in place so that help can be there. Yes, as Fadra just said, that safety plan is so important. And it's not the same for everyone. There's no, just as there's no right thing to say, there's no one right way to safety plan for every individual, and even for one person, right? Like a safety plan for me could be very different, you know, from year to year, or even from week to week. And so it's, I think, really about being to connect and meet each other where we're at.
Yeah, it's important. It's important. Yeah. So the next thing I wanted to know, is there some signs, or, I mean, is it something, let's say for instance, parents that they could, is there some signs that they should watch out for their kids, that maybe their kids may be thinking about suicide, or even for adults, like, right? Is there any signs that we could look out for?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what can be really tricky, especially for parents, is some of the signs that we look for can be very easily written off as, oh, a moody teenager, right? Because when you look at being more withdrawn or more irritable, things like increased substance abuse, but also, or substance use, those changes, those can point to other areas, but they can also be suicide risks or signals. And so I think really keeping the perspective of, it's not like, oh, so-and-so is more withdrawn, they're gonna kill themselves. That's
Okay.
not the thought process. The thought process is, okay, I see some risk signs here. It's important to have a conversation, and to know that a conversation isn't some big event. I think that's what we need to change. We need to make these conversations more normal, or more normalized, because if someone's really withdrawn and using substances a lot more and more irritable, things like that, even if suicide is not a risk, a conversation should be happening. That person is struggling. And so it's about reaching out there. But it can also be flipped, right? Like there's certain people where, and I know this happened for me when I was a lot younger, but when I had made the decision to kill myself, I felt more relief than I had ever felt in my life. And that's a very common thing that many people talk about. So if someone who's been struggling all of a sudden is like very calm and very detached, potentially giving things away. If there's a sudden shift in that direction, that's also
Okay.
check in around. Because if that person has made that decision, they may be feeling a sense of relief leading up to it.
That they've made a decision, and that's where they're going with it, so they feel calm and at ease now because they've made that decision.
Yeah, so but even though they've
Wow.
made that decision, that doesn't mean that there's not time and space to step in and shift.
Gotcha.
But I know
Gotcha.
Shannon also knows there's a long list of signs. Those are definitely not the only ones. So Shannon would definitely
Shannon,
jump in.
could you offer something to this?
Well-
I know that there's, I'm sure, some more signs that we could look out for. Shannon?
Well, I think Charlie hit on some really big and important ones. And I think that what I would add is that often there's a series of events that happen. Suicide doesn't usually come out of the blue. So often we'll find that there may be some sort of pre-existing condition, whether it was a traumatic event that took place or a history of mental illness or some kind of family history of a difficult situation or secret, or coming out and not being accepted. Something like that might happen. And then you'll see some other signs too, like the ones that Charlie was mentioning. But then what often happens is some kind of stressful life event. And that's what we really need to be watching out for right now in this time of pandemic and the holiday season. It could be that there's a job loss, a loss of housing, a loss of health insurance, and those kinds of losses when people are already feeling hopeless and dealing with other issues in their life. That's something that can really push someone over the edge in thinking about thoughts of suicide. So those are important things to watch out for. And I think what is so amazing about the work that you all are doing is that social justice is a huge part of suicide prevention. So we need to have programs in place in the community so that we're protecting people who experience job loss or housing loss or who can't pay for their next cart of groceries, right? Those are things that make people lose hope. Yeah.